The galaxy believed the wars were over. The Sith were gone. The wounds of Exar Kun had faded into history. But peace, real peace, never lasts long in the Republic. While senators debated trade routes and Jedi spoke of balance, something ancient was stirring far beyond the border stars. An army without a master. A culture born in battle, silent for decades, now gathering strength in the dark. It began quietly. Outposts in the mid-rim lost contact. Patrol fleets went missing near the Tingle Arm. And entire mining colonies stopped responding. No distress calls, no survivors. Just static. Freighters spoke of strange warbands moving in the void fleets marked by jagged iron and crimson sigils. The people who saw them didn't call them soldiers. They called them ghosts. They were Mandalorians. And they were preparing for something greater than anyone imagined. For generations, the Mandalorians had lived in scattered clans, mercenaries, bounty hunters, raiders for hire. Their wars were small, their purpose lost. But one man would change that. A warrior who found unity in conquest. Mandalore, the ultimate. He rebuilt their armies not as scavengers, but as crusaders. He promised the clans a destiny beyond the outer rim. Glory through fire, redemption through war. To them, peace was decay. And the galaxy had grown soft. It started on the edges, places the Republic barely remembered existed. Vanquo, Cathar, Onderon's moons. Worlds left undefended, forgotten by Coruscant's politics and the Jedi Council's restraint. When the Mandalorians struck, they didn't take territory. They erased it. Entire species wiped out to test the Republic's resolve. But the Republic didn't respond. Not yet. The Senate argued logistics. The Jedi debated philosophy. And while they spoke, the fire spread. Refugees poured into nearby systems, terrified miners, broken soldiers, entire families fleeing unseen fleets. Their stories were too wild to believe. Metal warriors in blue armor. Beasts wearing battle masks. Voices chanting in an ancient tongue before the slaughter began. The Jedi heard the rumors. They felt the tremor in the Force. But after Exar Kun, they had learned fear of their own strength. They called for patience, observation, meditation. And so the Mandalorians kept coming. Each victory feeding the next. Each silence from the core giving them permission to burn another world. The Republic's borders began to collapse not from invasion, but from disbelief. Because no one truly believed another war could come so soon. But it was already here, hidden behind the stars, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the Jedi to look away just long enough. In time, they would call it the Mandalorian Crusade. But to the ones who lived through those early years, it had no name. Only whispers, whispers of fleets that blotted out the suns, of warriors who came to die in glory, and of a mask forged in myth leading them all. The outer rim was burning, but the core didn't believe in flames it couldn't see. By the time refugees reached Coruscant, the war had already begun. Worlds were falling not one at a time, but in clusters, yet the Senate treated each report like a rumor from the frontier. They spoke of isolated attacks, of pirate disturbances, of unconfirmed aggression. Their debates lasted longer than the planets they were debating. The Republic had grown arrogant. Centuries of dominance had made it slow. And now, it was paying for its own pride. Inside the Senate rotunda, thousands of representatives argued over treaties and taxation. while the edges of their republic crumbled into dust. Fleet commanders begged for reinforcements. Border colonies called for help. But the senators couldn't agree who should pay for it. So they did nothing. The Jedi Council watched from above, silent, patient, uncertain. They felt the tremor in the Force but refused to name it. Because to name it meant to act, and to act meant another war. They told themselves the galaxy needed calm, not chaos. But the truth was simpler. They were afraid. Afraid of becoming what they once fought. Afraid of seeing another Exar Kun rise from their own ranks. Afraid that the dark side was waiting for them to take the first step. So they didn't. And on the other side of the galaxy, Mandalore the Ultimate smiled. The Mandalorians understood the Republic better than the Republic understood itself. They had studied its weaknesses, the bureaucracy, the distance, the blind faith in diplomacy. They struck where help was slowest to arrive, where fleets had been decommissioned, where Jedi oversight had been removed in the name of peace. To the Senate, the attacks were statistics. To the people on those worlds, they were extinction. On Cathar, the Mandalorians descended like a storm. They gave no warning, no chance for surrender. When the survivors finally reached the core, they spoke of an ocean dyed red of warriors in blue armor forcing prisoners into the waves. It should have been enough to rouse the Republic. But it wasn't. The reports were buried beneath politics and procedure. The Jedi spoke of investigation, not intervention. And in that silence, the Mandalorian crusade spread unchecked. Ships vanished along hyperspace routes. Colonies disappeared without trace. Every system that resisted was wiped clean. Every victory brought the Mandalorians closer to the core. To those who saw the pattern, it was already too late. To those who didn't, it was still someone else's problem. The Republic's strength had always been its unity. Now, that unity was its weakness. Because when everyone is responsible, no one acts. While senators debated, Mandalore gathered. While the Jedi meditated, the Outer Rim fell. And while the galaxy slept, the fire spread inward. The war was no longer coming. It was here. But the Republic, too proud, too comfortable, too blind, still called it peace. The galaxy had seen darkness before, and that memory, that wound, was still bleeding beneath the surface. Just 40 years earlier, the Republic had almost fallen to the Great Sith War. The name Exar Kun still lingered like a curse. He had been one of their own, a Jedi Knight turned destroyer. He raised armies of fallen students. He turned the very Force against itself. Entire worlds had burned. The Jedi had nearly destroyed themselves trying to stop him. So when the first whispers of the Mandalorian threat reached the temple halls, fear rose again, not of the enemy, but of themselves. The Council remembered what passion could do. They remembered the hunger that corrupted their brothers. They remembered how easily light had become shadow. And so, when the cries for help came from the Rim, the Council turned inward instead of outward. They called for meditation, reflection, patience. They told themselves that the Mandalorians were not Sith, that this was not their fight. But that lie grew heavier with each passing week. In the archives of Ossus and Coruscant, ancient records spoke of the Mandalorians of the Tang species that once warred against the galaxy itself. Of their code that worshipped conflict, that saw peace as a sickness. The Jedi knew what they were. They just didn't want to face them again. But the young Jedi were restless. They listened to the screams echoing across the Force. They felt worlds dying. And in that silence, some began to lose faith not in the Republic, but in the Council. Among them was a name whispered in the lower halls: Revan. A brilliant tactician. A voice others began to follow. He questioned the Council's restraint, calling it cowardice wrapped in wisdom. Beside him stood his closest friend, Alec, the one who would become Malak. Both saw the same truth the Council refused to face: that the galaxy was burning, and the Jedi were watching it happen. The war hadn't reached the core yet, but the Force was already moving. Something dark was stirring beneath the noise. A shadow waiting beyond the stars, whispering through the cracks of the war to come. And somewhere, in a region no chart could name, that shadow took form. An ancient presence hidden since the fall of Naga Sadow watched the Mandalorians rise and smiled. The Sith had not died with Exar Kun. They had simply gone deeper into the dark. Mandalore the Ultimate didn't know it yet, but his crusade served another's design. Whispers in his dreams spoke of conquest, of destiny, of glory beyond death. He thought it was the call of the ancestors. It wasn't. It was the Sith Emperor of Drummond Kaas sending visions across the void, guiding the Mandalorians toward a war that would shatter the galaxy again. A war that would forge new monsters from heroes. And so, history began to repeat itself, not because the galaxy forgot its past, but because it feared to face it. The same pride that blinded the Republic now silenced the Jedi. The same darkness that once consumed Exar Kun was waiting for a new name. The Force was warning them all, but no one was listening. His name was once forgotten, lost among the ashes of failed wars and broken clans. But by 3976 BBY, every warrior in the Outer Rim spoke it again. Mandalore the Ultimate. He didn't just lead the Mandalorians. He reshaped them. For decades, the Mandalorian clans had lived in disunity, scattered across mercenary contracts and border skirmishes, more myth than threat. But Mandalore changed that. He offered something their people hadn't had in generations: purpose. He called it the Neo-Crusade. Not just a war, a destiny. A return to ancient strength. A test of the galaxy's worthiness. And they followed. One by one, the clans bent the knee. Roland Dyer, Kelborn, the Basilisk War Droid legions. Even the Mandalorian giants swore loyalty. Those who refused didn't remain long enough to be remembered. Mandalore didn't rebuild the old Mandalorians. He reforged them into something worse. Their armor became standardized cold, jagged iron marked by Crimson War sigils. Their tactics became unified fast strikes, total extermination, no negotiation. Their doctrine was rewritten. Conquest wasn't greed. It was faith. He told them the galaxy had grown soft. That peace was weakness in disguise, and that only war could restore meaning. And they believed him. He trained them to see the Republic not as an enemy, but as prey. A civilization drunk on its own history, led by diplomats and dreamers, guarded by mystics too afraid to raise their blades. To the Mandalorians, it was an open invitation. But Mandalore wasn't just preparing for war. He was engineering a myth. Every raid, every system burned, every settlement left in ruin, it was a test. Not of firepower, but of the Republic's will. And every silence that followed was his answer. He began targeting hyperspace routes, destroying listening posts, isolating sectors from communication. Slowly, quietly, He turned the Rim into a no-man's land of fear and silence. The Republic didn't even know how many systems it had already lost. And deep within uncharted space, Mandalore gathered the full might of his armada. Dreadnoughts outfitted with Beskar-plated hulls, fleets of war beasts and basilisk droids ready to drop from orbit. Commanders trained not in strategy, but in total annihilation. He didn't want to take planets. He wanted to break them. In the camps of Deek-Sun, war drums echoed through the jungle night. In the void of the Kadavo graveyards, ships blackened with soot awaited their orders. And across the stars, the final generation of free Outer Rim systems braced in silence. The storm was no longer building. It had gathered, and its name was Mandalore. The Jedi still waited. The Senate still argued. The Corps still dreamed of peace. But in the dark, beyond the charts, the first real war since Exar Kun was about to begin. And this time, it would not be a war for power. It would be a war of extinction. One that would shape the next 1,000 years of galactic history. And no one was ready for it. When Mandalore the Indomitable fell at the feet of a beast god on Deek-Sun, his warriors did not mourn him. They scattered. The clans fractured into silence. Some became mercenaries, others vanished into exile. Their unity died with their leader, and without the mask, there was no successor. The title Mandalore was not earned by bloodline. It was claimed through strength and witnessed by the mask. But after the defeat on Onderon, the mask was lost. And so was their purpose. For years, there was no Mandalore, no voice to lead them, no vision to bind them. What remained of the great Mandalorian culture drifted quiet, broken, aimless. They took contracts from petty warlords, sold their blades to the highest bidder, and every job, every kill, pulled them further from who they were. But in the shadows of that ruin, one warrior watched. He did not speak. He did not claim. He studied. His name is forgotten, buried by the myth he became. Some say he was born of the Tong, the original Mandalorian species. Others believe he was a foundling raised in the old warrior creeds. What is known is that he did what no other dared. He searched the jungles of Deek-Sun and found the mask. It was still there, cracked, worn, resting in the mud where the last Mandalore fell. He took it, not to honor the past, but to overwrite it. And when he placed it upon his face, the past ended. The clans didn't rally overnight. There was no thunderous return, no grand announcement. There was only silence and death, because he began with the warlords, the ones who had sold Mandalorian pride for credits, the ones who traded tradition for power. One by one, he hunted them, not to punish them, but to show the others what came next. He never removed the mask again. Not in victory, not in ceremony, not even in solitude, because he wasn't just wearing a title. He was becoming something else, something the galaxy had forgotten how to fear. He took the name Mandalore, the ultimate, a name not of heritage, but of prophecy. He believed the Mandalorians had a role in history, not as soldiers, not as survivors, but as the storm that reminded the galaxy what strength looked like. He began speaking of a crusade, not one of territory, but of trial. He told the clans that war itself was sacred. That battle was the language of truth. and that the galaxy had grown soft in its absence. Some mocked him, others challenged him. None lasted long. He didn't ask the clans to follow. He made them. With every warlord that fell, others began to kneel. Not out of fear, but recognition. The Mandalorians had always followed the strong, and there was no one stronger. Not in blade, not in vision. The silence that followed the Indomitable's fall was over. A new voice had risen. Cold, calculated, and absolute, the clans had a leader again. And soon, the galaxy would remember what that meant. To unify the clans, he did not offer peace. He offered war. Mandalore the Ultimate knew the Mandalorians had forgotten who they were. Their culture had been diluted, spread thin through years of mercenary work, stripped of its purpose. To restore them, he would not rebuild the past. He would create something new. A crucible. It began with trials. Those who wished to serve him were not accepted by blood or name. They had to earn the right to wear the armor. He called them Neo-Crusaders, not a rank, but a rebirth. Each warrior was reforged in the old rites. Pain became devotion. Obedience became faith. The forge was not just metal. It was identity. For the first time in Mandalorian history, armor was standardized. Not personalized, not passed down through families. It was issued uniform, marked by rank and role. Blue for soldiers, crimson for officers, gold for field marshals. This was no longer a collection of clans. It was a military. An army with one voice, one vision, and one sacred law. The strong must rise. The weak must fall. And only war would decide which was which. He created a new doctrine, the Resolve Nair, the 6 actions that defined the way of the Mandalorian. Allegiance to the Mandalore, defense of the clan, respect for tradition, raising warriors, wearing armor, speaking Mandoa. Those who refused were cast out. Those who broke the code were broken in turn. This wasn't about honor. It was about survival. Because Mandalore, the Ultimate, believed the galaxy was about to face something far worse than the Jedi. And if the Mandalorians didn't become a weapon, they would be destroyed like one. He taught his followers that conquest was cleansing, that the act of war removed weakness not just from others, but from themselves. Every battle was a ritual. Every fallen enemy, a lesson. Every scar, a mark of readiness. They stopped fighting for pay. They fought for purpose. On the ice worlds of Shogun, they trained in sub-zero storms. In the lava fields of Shogun, they learned to fight without breath. And in the graveyards of Basilisk, they tamed war droids with their bare hands. Discipline replaced chaos. Order replaced tradition. And faith, not in gods, but in war itself, replaced everything else. Mandalore's vision didn't stop at unity. He wanted more than just warriors. He wanted believers. And they believed. Because under his rule, the Mandalorians were rising again. Stronger, faster, hungrier. They built ships in silence, outfitted fleets with stolen technology, modified Basilisk droids to serve as drop units from orbit, living weapons that fell like meteors onto unsuspecting worlds. They weren't preparing for a war. They were becoming one. And in every ceremony, every chant, every training exercise that ended with death, the message was the same. The galaxy had grown soft, but the Mandalorians would remind it what fear tasted like. They didn't call it a war. Not at first. There were no declarations, no ultimatums, no messages sent to the Republic. Only silence. And then fire. The Neo-Crusaders began their advance system by system, testing their strength against forgotten worlds in the Outer Rim. It was never about conquest. Not yet. These were proving grounds. Each assault was a question. Each response or lack of one was an answer. They struck Vanquo, raising mining outposts in a single day. Then Ulthur, where civilian freighters were hunted through asteroid fields for sport. Then Diexon again, not to reclaim it, but to test those who had claimed it in their absence. Each world was chosen with care. Each target served a purpose. Because Mandalore, the ultimate, wasn't just building momentum, he was cleansing his army of hesitation. And no single event marked that transformation more than what happened on Cathar. The Cathar were not a military power. They had no fleets, no allies, only honor and memory. They remembered the last Mandalorian War. They had survived it. But survival wasn't enough. Mandalore ordered his forces to make an example. Not to destroy the Cathar civilization, to erase it. The Neo-Crusaders landed in silence. They corralled the population to the coast, and under a blood-red sky, they drove the Cathar into the sea. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a ritual. Field Marshal Cassius Fett stood above the waves and gave the command. The tide turned red. 10,000 voices fell silent. The Mandalorians didn't celebrate. They chanted. It wasn't just death. It was a lesson. To the galaxy, resistance is extinction. To themselves, weakness is unforgivable. The armor had changed them. Not just in form but in thought. Standardization stripped away the individual. What mattered now was role. Color, order, obedience. They moved as one, fought as one, spoke as one, and behind it all, Mandalore watched, not with pride, with certainty. The crusade was working. They were no longer raiders. They were no longer mercenaries. They were Mandalorian. The Republic still hadn't responded. The Jedi still debated in their temples. The Senate filed reports into classified archives that no one read. And while the Corps looked away, the crusade continued. Neo-Crusader envoys began visiting neutral worlds not to negotiate, but to test their willingness to kneel. Some surrendered before the first ship landed. Others fought and were buried where they stood. The crusade was not measured in territory. It was measured in obedience, in silence, in how little resistance each new world gave. The Mandalorians didn't need to conquer the galaxy to win. They just needed to prove that no one could stop them. And so they marched, not to occupy, to demonstrate. Every scar left behind wasn't a sign of cruelty. It was a signature. The Neo-Crusaders were no longer just warriors. They were doctrine made flesh. And the galaxy was beginning to understand what that meant. But it was already too late. Because something even darker was beginning to whisper beneath the war drums. Something older than Mandalore. Something that had waited, in silence, for centuries. He called it destiny, but it wasn't his. When Mandalore, the ultimate, began his crusade, he told his warriors that the galaxy itself was calling them to battle. That war was sacred, that the Force demanded it. But the truth whispered through the shadows of deep space was far darker. because something was speaking to him. Something that had been waiting beyond the edge of the known galaxy since the fall of Naga Sato. An ancient voice carried across centuries of silence. It came not from gods or ancestors, but from the Sith. Deep within the unknown regions, hidden behind storms and shattered hyperspace routes, lay a forgotten empire. A remnant of the old Sith species, ruled by a presence that called itself Emperor. He was no phantom, no legend. He was real. And he had been watching the galaxy rebuild since the Great Hyperspace War. He saw the Jedi's fear. He saw the Republic's arrogance. And he saw in the Mandalorians the perfect weapon. Through the dark side, his whispers reached Mandalore's mind, visions of victory, of eternal glory, of the galaxy kneeling beneath his banner. To a warrior culture desperate for purpose, it felt like divine prophecy. But it was a lie. Every dream, every battle plan, every instinct to expand the crusade, all of it guided by an unseen hand. Mandalore never questioned the visions. He believed they came from the ancestors, from the spirits of the Tong who demanded vengeance for forgotten centuries. In truth, it was the Sith Emperor bending his will from across the void, planting seeds that would one day tear the Republic apart. And it worked. Each victory pushed the Mandalorians closer to the core. Each world burned brought Revan one step closer to rebellion. Every slaughter weakened the Republic's faith in the Jedi. The galaxy was being carved into pieces by design. The Sith didn't need to lead armies. They only needed to aim them. On Rekiad, during a campaign that wiped out an entire system, Mandalore began seeing the visions even in waking hours. He spoke of a shadow world beyond charted space, a place that called to him like home. He described towers of black stone, oceans frozen in silence, a throne surrounded by lightning. The image haunted him, but he mistook the fear for revelation. He told his warlords the message was clear: the galaxy had become weak. It needed cleansing, and the Mandalorians would be the fire that burned away its corruption. In the temples of the Sith, deep in the dark of Dromund Kaz, the Emperor watched. He didn't move. He didn't interfere. He didn't need to. Because Mandalore was already doing his work. The galaxy would see a Mandalorian crusade. The Jedi would see a moral test. But behind it all, the Sith saw something else, the perfect storm. A war that would wound both sides so deeply, the darkness could return unopposed. And when that day came, the Emperor would not need to conquer the galaxy. He would inherit it. The Jedi felt it before anyone spoke of it. A tremor, a flicker in the Force, distant but growing, like a storm rising behind the edge of the sky. Whispers of war reached the temple long before the Senate took them seriously, and long before Revan gave them a name. But the Council did nothing. Their chambers high above Coruscant remained quiet. No commands, no calls to arms, only silence, because they remembered what silence had once cost them, and what noise had nearly destroyed them. 40 years ago, they had trusted a Jedi named Exar Kun. They watched him rise in power, admired his potential, and by the time they saw what he had become, it was too late. He had turned their students. He had ignited a war that scarred the core worlds. He had corrupted the Force itself. It took everything the Jedi had to stop him. And even in victory, they were never the same. Now, as the Outer Rim burned, they feared making that mistake again. They feared what might happen if they moved too soon. So they chose not to move at all. They sent envoys. They held sessions of reflection. They studied battle reports through meditative vision. But they would not fight. Not yet. Mace Windu, still young, then argued for caution. Atris believed the Jedi should wait for more clarity. Even Vrook Lamar, hardened by the last war, warned against another rush into conflict. Their reasoning was sound. Their logic, sharp. But their fear was louder. The Mandalorians were not Sith. They did not use the dark side. They were not manipulating the Force. And that made them harder to predict and harder to face. To strike first would mean stepping into a war that wasn't bound by the Force. A war of chaos. A war the Jedi weren't sure they had the right to fight. So they told themselves the Republic must lead. That, if war came to the core, they would answer. But until then, they would watch. They thought they were buying time. But all they were buying was blood. On worlds like Eras 3, the cries of the dying bled into the Force louder each day. Jedi Knights stationed in the Mid-Rim began to question the silence. Some disobeyed orders and returned from their posts. Others sent urgent messages back to Coruscant, begging for permission to act. No answer came. Inside the temple, the fracture was already forming. Not with blades, but with doubt. The young whispered in hallways. They gathered in quiet meditation chambers. They debated the code not to break it, but to save what it was meant to protect. The Force was speaking, but the Council would not listen. And somewhere among the learners and wanderers, a new voice began to rise. Not loud, not angry, but certain. He saw what others feared to admit. That war had already begun, and the Jedi were pretending it hadn't. His name was Revan, and his voice would become a storm. He never shouted. He didn't need to. Revan was not the strongest in the temple, not the fastest, not even the most obedient. But he was the one they listened to. Because he asked the questions no one else would. Why do we call ourselves guardians if we only guard what's convenient? Why is the Jedi code used to preserve peace but never to defend the dying? Others had wondered these things. But when Revan spoke, he made doubt sound like truth, and truth feel like duty. He was still young, barely past Padawan. But his mind moved like a strategist. Every word precise. Every silence intentional. He studied ancient wars the way others studied the Force. He knew names, tactics, patterns, and where they led. He didn't challenge the Council with anger. He challenged them with history. He spoke of Cathar, of how an entire people had been slaughtered, of how the Jedi had watched it happen, of how inaction was already turning to complicity. Those who heard him didn't feel rage. They felt shame, and one by one, they began to follow. Not openly, not with banners or blades, but with small, simple choices. They met in side halls, traded messages between outer rim postings, shared visions, doubts, and warnings not to rebel but to prepare. He never called it a rebellion. He called it readiness. They began to refer to themselves as the revanchists, named not after conquest, but after correction. They didn't want to destroy the Jedi Order. They wanted to save what it had forgotten. Revan believed the Force was not passive, that it was calling them to act. And if they ignored it again, more would die. He studied the Mandalorian tactics, even as the Council dismissed them. He tracked patterns no one else saw. He predicted invasions before they began. And he was right. Again and again. But the more he spoke, the more he was watched. By the Council, by the Masters, and by the Dark. Because something else had begun to take interest in Revan. Something ancient. Something silent. In the quiet hours, he meditated on the edge of the temple, looking beyond the stars, and sometimes he looked too far. Visions came, of battles not yet fought, of enemies not yet revealed, of himself standing on broken worlds, wrapped in armor he did not yet wear. He told no one, but he felt it. Fate was bending, and the Jedi were running out of time. Still, the Council remained silent. Still, the Senate waited. And still, Revan spoke. Not in anger, but in urgency. Because he could feel it in the Force, something was coming. Something worse than war. And if the Jedi didn't move soon, it would consume everything. His name was Alec. Tall, impulsive, loyal to a fault. Where Revan's voice was measured and calm, Alec's burned like wildfire. He didn't speak in visions or tactics. He spoke in absolutes, in conviction, in belief, and above all, he believed in Revan. They had trained together as Padawans, meditated in the same quiet chambers, debated the same philosophy with the same masters. But where others drifted in and out of Revan's orbit, Alec remained. Because he saw what others missed. Revan wasn't seeking power. He was carrying a burden no one else wanted. And Alec made a choice to carry it with him. When the Council questioned Revan's tone, Alec defended him. When the archives tried to restrict his access, Alec found other ways in. He wasn't a follower. He was a mirror reflecting Revan's belief, amplifying it, turning thought into momentum. Some masters called him reckless, others dangerous. But behind closed doors, the younger Jedi began to call him something else. Malak, a warrior's name. Earned, not given. It wasn't meant to be a title of darkness. It was meant to be a shield. To protect Revan's vision and to show the galaxy that they would no longer wait. Together, they traveled to the edges of the war. Not to fight, not yet, but to see. They walked the ruins of Cathar, stood where the bodies had been piled into the sea, felt the echo in the Force, a wound that never closed. Revan said nothing for hours, but that night, he carved a mask from the bone of a fallen soldier. Not for intimidation, for remembrance. He swore never to remove it until justice had been served. Alec watched him change that day. The calm grew colder, the certainty sharper. Revan was no longer waiting for permission. He was preparing for war. Word spread quickly. The revanchists were no longer a whisper. They were real. They were moving. And they were gaining numbers. More Jedi began to join. Knights stationed near the outer rim. Healers who couldn't ignore the pain echoing through the Force. Archivists who saw the signs in history and recognized what was coming. They didn't bring weapons. They brought will. Together, they planned routes into war zones, established hidden bases of aid, rescued refugees from Mandalorian slave camps, and every act of defiance made the Council tighten its grip. But it was already too late. Revan had become a symbol, and Alec Malak had become his sword. They weren't rebels. They were Jedi. And in their eyes, The code had failed to live up to its own promise. They weren't turning from the Order. They were trying to save it. One decision at a time. One rescue at a time. One step closer to the edge of darkness, without ever realizing how far they were already walking. The Council could no longer ignore it. What had begun as whispers was now a movement. Revan's name was spoken in the streets. His symbol, a plain bone-white mask, had become a mark of hope and fear. But inside the Jedi Temple, it was something else. It was division. Some masters believed he had fallen already. That pride had overtaken purpose. That defiance, even when well-meaning, was still the path to ruin. Others saw something different. They saw the Order standing still while the galaxy bled. They remembered Exar Kun not as a warning, but as a mistake the Council had repeated. Too much silence, too much fear. They didn't agree with Revan's methods, but they no longer believed the Council was right, either. There were no arguments in the chambers, no yelling, just stillness, a quiet war behind unreadable eyes. By the time the Mandalorians began advancing toward Taris, the revanchists had become an army in all but name. They wore no uniforms, carried no banners, but they moved with purpose. Revan stopped asking for permission. He led Jedi into battle, not through Senate approval, not through Council orders, through choice. And choice was more dangerous than orders ever were. The first engagement came near Suurja, a strategic point along one of the Republic's hyperspace routes. The Mandalorians were pushing deeper, testing response times, and the Republic Navy was losing. Revan deployed his Jedi without clearance. They struck fast, not as guardians, but as tacticians. They disrupted Mandalorian flanks, protected retreating civilians, held the line where Republic forces had broken. And they won. But it came at a cost. The moment Revan ignited his lightsaber in open combat, the Jedi Order changed. The divide became real. A rift too wide to close. The Council summoned him, demanded his return. But he refused. Not with arrogance, with clarity. He said the Force had already chosen, that the war would not wait for Council deliberation, and that the Jedi had to make a choice now. Many stayed, but more began to leave. Not just young knights, masters, healers, those who had once believed in patience but had seen enough. Revan never claimed leadership. He accepted it as a burden. And Malak, never far behind, stood as his shield. Together, they became the face of the Jedi to the Republic. The Republic Senate welcomed them. Citizens called them heroes. Soldiers followed their orders without question. But the Council watched with growing dread, because they knew every Jedi that left the temple weakened the Order. Every life taken on the battlefield pulled the revanchists further from the code. And every victory in the name of justice brought them closer to the dark. The war had begun, not just between the Republic and the Mandalorians, but between Jedi and Jedi, between silence and action, between the memory of Exar Kun and the shadow of what Revan might become. The Council did not fall that day, but it bent. And something inside the Order, something sacred, quietly cracked. The Mandalorians had forced their hand, but it was the Jedi themselves who split the blade. And as the revanchists pushed deeper into war, no one realized what they were leaving behind. Outer Rim burns. The Mandalorians didn't knock. They never asked. They arrived in orbit and planets disappeared. It began with scattered colonies, then trade worlds, then entire systems. Cathar, Althar, Skiru, Flashpoint. Each name faded behind static transmissions and unanswered beacons. Each one swallowed in silence before the Republic understood what it meant. The Mandalorians weren't invading. They were cleansing, erasing resistance not with fleets of diplomacy, but with fleets of flame. But the core didn't understand. Not yet. In the Senate, they still called it a series of isolated incidents. Strategic miscommunications, rogue sectors. The word war was avoided like a curse. They passed sanctions, held debates, launched inquiries, and in the Outer Rim, people died. The Republic Navy was scattered, barely rebuilt after the Great Sith War. Its admirals were cautious, its ships outdated, and its chain of command tangled in protocol. They weren't trained to fight Mandalorians. They weren't trained to fight anything. And even those who tried couldn't hold the line. The Mandalorians moved too fast. They used hyperspace routes no one knew existed. They struck deep into the Rim, bypassing known defenses, and left entire sectors burning behind them. They didn't want territory. They wanted impact. They wanted the Republic to watch, to feel helpless, to feel afraid. And it worked. In the core worlds, fear bled into confusion. Families with roots on the Rim lost contact with entire homeworlds. Refugees arrived at orbital checkpoints with nothing but stories of ash. They weren't asking for aid. They were asking where the Republic had gone. No one had an answer. In Jedi temples across the galaxy, the Force began to scream. Not in words, but in grief. Jedi assigned to peaceful regions felt waves of panic they couldn't trace. Battle-hardened knights recalled visions of loss that hadn't happened yet. Padawans wept during meditations they didn't understand. But the Council still held its line. It wasn't time. The situation was developing. They weren't ignoring the war. They were waiting for clarity. And in that wait, the fire spread. The revanchists sent their own scouts, not soldiers, but witnesses. They recorded what the Republic would not, and brought it back, holoreel by holoreel, to those who still doubted the truth. Children pulled from burning wreckage. Clone lab workers executed on live comms. Entire cities flattened before a single blaster bolt was fired in defense. It wasn't conquest. It was doctrine. And the galaxy was unprepared for an enemy that didn't want to rule only to prove it could destroy. One admiral, stationed near the Duros border, filed a classified report after watching 5 systems fall in a week. It ended with one line. "We aren't retreating. We're being erased." Still, the Senate refused to vote for full war powers. Still, the Jedi refused to intervene. Still, the Republic believed it could reason with a storm. But the Outer Rim knew better. They'd already seen the future. They'd watched it fall from the sky. Because this wasn't the beginning of war. This was the end of warning. They came before dawn. No warnings. No demands. Only orbiting dreadnoughts and silence. The people of Cathar had survived a Mandalorian war before. They remembered the scars, the chants, the armor, but memory wasn't enough to stop what was coming. When the Neo-Crusaders descended on Cathar, it wasn't to conquer. It was to make a statement. A statement in blood. The Mandalorians didn't use ground invasion tactics. They herded, rounded up civilians from their cities, their shelters, their caves, forced them toward the coast, thousands at a time. There were no military targets, no resistance forces, no Republic presence. Just Cathar, proud, feral, beautiful, and doomed. Cassius Fett led the assault. Field Marshal, strategist, icon. He stood on the cliffs above the shoreline, watching as his warriors forced men, women, and children into the sea. They screamed, they pleaded, they drowned, and those who could not drown fast enough were helped. The Neo-Crusaders stood along the ridge and fired, not in anger, not in frenzy, but in rhythm, like a chant. By the time the waters calmed, over 10,000 lives were gone, erased from a species already near extinction. It wasn't war, it was ritual. Because this wasn't just about Cathar, it was about everyone else. A message to the Outer Rim. This is what happens when you remember who we used to be. This is what happens when you resist. The massacre was never broadcast. The Republic never spoke of it. The Senate never addressed it. But the Jedi felt it. Years later, when Revan stood on the shores of Cathar, he would feel it again. He wasn't alone. A Jedi named Malak stood beside him, and so did a young knight named Mitra Surik. They came not for strategy, but for answers, and the Force gave them one. As they meditated, a vision overtook them, not of the present, not of prophecy, of memory. They saw the slaughter as it happened, felt it, heard it. They saw the Neo-Crusaders chanting, saw Cassius Fett remove his helmet, not in shame, but pride. And in that moment, something inside Revan changed. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He stepped into the water, lifted a piece of shattered armor from beneath the sand, and made a vow. He carved a mask, bone-white, featureless, not Mandalorian, not Jedi, just a symbol of silence, of guilt, of what would no longer be allowed to happen. He wore it from that day forward, not to hide, but to remember. The Jedi Council would later call the massacre a tragedy, but Revan called it something else. He called it proof. Proof that the war wasn't just necessary, it was already lost. And unless someone acted now, the rest of the galaxy would join Cathar beneath the waves. Serroco was supposed to hold. It was the Outer Rim's shield, a fortress world, heavily garrisoned, strategically placed, Republic trained, Republic armed, untouchable. That's what they told themselves. The Mandalorians knew better. They didn't attack Serroco like a traditional enemy. They didn't land troops. They didn't sabotage the planetary grid. They didn't even speak. They waited. Let the Republic settle in. Let the garrison commanders believe they were safe. Let the refugees pour into the bunkers, believing walls would save them. Then, they began the countdown. The bombardment started from high orbit. 33 dreadnoughts. 12 hours of uninterrupted fire. No warning, no mercy. The Republic ships stationed above Serroco tried to intercept. They were destroyed in minutes. Their distress signals never reached Coruscant. The jamming fields had already been deployed. The first kinetic strikes targeted surface command, then power stations, then civilian quarters. But that wasn't the end. Because the Mandalorians weren't just after victory. They were after annihilation. What followed wasn't tactical. It was total. They deployed seismic torpedoes, triggered tectonic fractures, ripped the crust open from orbit, turned the cities into fire pits, and the fire pits into graves. By the end of the second day, Serroco was gone. Not lost. Gone. 90% of the surface uninhabitable. Over 2 million Republic personnel dead. Entire refugee networks erased. The Republic couldn't believe it. It had never happened before. A fortified world destroyed not by fleets, but by decision. Serroco's garrison never surrendered. They never even fired a shot. They died in place. Beneath their own command posts, their defenses untouched, their weapons unused. Because the war had changed. And no one told them. The Jedi Council received the reports 3 days later. The casualty lists were incomplete. The visual records corrupted. But the pain in the Force was clear. It pulsed like an open wound through the meditation chambers. Jedi across the galaxy fell into silence. Some collapsed during lessons. Others broke into tears mid-ritual. There was no vision, no prophecy, only absence. Thousands of lives erased in an instant, and the Force responded with stillness. Revan saw the images before the Council did. He had them smuggled out of Serroco's debris field, recovered from a Republic scout vessel that didn't survive the return. He didn't show them to his followers. He showed them to Malak, and said nothing. He didn't have to, because Serroco wasn't a battle. It was proof that the Mandalorians had no limits, that their war wasn't bound by code, that their goal wasn't conquest, it was memory. They wanted the Republic to remember what fear looked like, and Serroco delivered it. In the Senate, voices began to crack. Military leaders called for emergency powers. Jedi Masters whispered of long-dead wars waking again. And civilians, those watching from the core, from Chandrila, from Anaxes, began to wonder if their own skies might one day burn the same color. Serroco did not fall because it was weak. It fell because the galaxy still believed in rules. But the Mandalorians didn't come for rules. They came to prove that no one was safe. They said the Jedi were at peace, that they were calm, measured, detached. But even peace can fracture. And now, the cracks were beginning to show. After Serroco, something shifted. Not on the battlefield, but in the halls of the Jedi Temple. The silence no longer protected them. It haunted them. Meditations became difficult. Visions grew dark. Students stopped asking questions. And the older masters stopped answering them. They felt it in the Force. Not as a disturbance, but as something worse. An accusation. Every death echoed. Every scream lost in space returned in dreams. Some tried to rationalize it. The Jedi could not act in haste. The war must unfold before they intervened. But that logic was wearing thin. Because the war wasn't waiting. And the Force didn't feel patient anymore. On Dantooine, younglings began waking in the night. Tears falling without understanding why. Their masters told them it was just imbalance. But imbalance doesn't cry out like that. Only pain does. On Ossus, Jedi healers reported phantom wounds. Blaster burns across backs that weren't there. Collapsed lungs with no damage. Choked throats that refused to breathe during sleep. And on Coruscant, the great Jedi Council itself sat quieter than ever. They had no answers, only regrets. Even those who had once spoken with confidence now sat in longer meditation, their eyes heavier, their voices softer, because they knew the window was closing, and perhaps had already closed. They had waited for guidance. They had waited for truth, and in that waiting millions had died. But they weren't the only ones breaking. Across the galaxy, Jedi Knights who had stayed behind were beginning to question everything. Some resigned, left the Order without ceremony, returned to their homeworlds and never picked up a lightsaber again. Others stayed, but changed. They followed the news of the revanchists, not with judgment, but longing. Many began to see Revan not as a traitor, but as the only Jedi still listening to the Force. They didn't say it aloud, not in the temple, not in the chambers, but when they closed their eyes at night. It was his name, they whispered. The Council tried to reassert control. They sent envoys to calm outer enclaves, tried to reaffirm the code, restore discipline. But discipline cannot cure guilt, and the Jedi were drowning in it. Because it wasn't just Cathar. It wasn't just Seroko. It was world after world. Families they didn't save. Settlements they ignored. Systems that fell while they meditated on whether they should care. For the first time in centuries, the Jedi weren't just unsure. They were ashamed, and shame doesn't stay quiet for long. He found it in the sand, half buried beneath the tide. Scorched bone, rimmed with ash, a remnant of a life destroyed, and a silence that killed. The shores of Cathar were still. No birds, no wind, only the gentle pull of the sea, as if trying to wash away what had happened there. But the Force remembered, and so did he. Revan stood at the water's edge, surrounded by survivors and ghosts. The Jedi beside him, Malak, Mitra, Surik, and others had felt it too. The echo of something terrible. A wound in the Force, so deep it would never heal. The Mandalorians had not just killed the Cathar. They had tried to erase them. Their people, their cities, their memory. But memory lived in places they could not reach. In the rocks, in the waves, and in him. The vision had struck like lightning. A Force echo shared among all present. They saw the massacre, heard the screams, watched the warriors line up the innocent and drive them into the sea. And when it ended, when the image faded into salt and silence, Revan did not speak. He knelt, reached down, and lifted a fragment of armor. Not Mandalorian, not Jedi, something in between. A mask, colorless, smooth, unmarked. It had no expression, because it was not meant to show one. He held it for a long time, turned it in his hands, and without a word placed it over his face. From that moment on, he never removed it. Not in victory, not in pain, not even in solitude. He became the mask, not to conceal himself, but to remember what had been forgotten. It wasn't armor. It was a vow, a promise to the dead, that no one would suffer like Cathar again. Not if he could stop it, The Jedi Council saw it as a symbol of pride, a rejection of identity. But Revan knew better. The Council had watched Cathar burn, had waited while millions were lost. And still, they hesitated. But he had seen the truth, and he would carry it with him not in robes or rank, but in silence. The mask became legend. To some, it was a mark of rebellion. To others, of leadership. But to him, it was a reminder that the Jedi were not beyond failure, that peace was not always sacred, and that inaction was not always wisdom. He didn't speak about it, didn't justify it. He just wore it. Every day, into every battle, before every decision. And slowly others began to follow. Not with masks, but with conviction. Because if the Jedi could not lead, then someone had to. Revan did not ask to become that leader. He became it the moment no one else would. The Council called it heresy, but the galaxy called it hope. They had no banners, no formal ranks, no official orders. But Jedi were leaving, not all at once, not in defiance, in quiet, one night at a time. A message would arrive from the front, from a wounded system, from the edge of the war. A coded transmission, a list of names, a request for help. And the Jedi would go, not to fight, but to see. Once they saw, they never returned the same. Some never returned at all. Because what Revan had created wasn't a rebellion. It was a reckoning. And it was growing. They called themselves revanchists. Not because they wanted revenge, but because they wanted to reclaim what had been lost. The purpose of the Jedi, the duty they had sworn, the galaxy they had promised to protect. For too long, the Jedi had stood apart, above the war, beyond the suffering, detached in peace. But Revan had shown them something else. That sometimes the code is not enough, and silence is its own betrayal. Jedi healers joined first, those who could no longer ignore the cries in the Force. Then watchmen, then knights stationed in systems already crumbling beneath the Mandalorian advance. Even a few masters, quiet, tired, burdened by years of unanswered visions, stepped into the shadows to follow. They didn't swear allegiance to Revan. They didn't need to. They followed because he moved. While the Council debated, while the Senate stalled, while people died, he was the only one moving. The revanchists weren't organized like an army. They didn't operate from a single base. They had no capital ship, no legal authority. But they acted. They protected refugee routes, escorted transports across Mandalorian-controlled sectors, rescued captives from labor camps on Flashpoint and Altha, rebuilt fallen outposts using their own resources, funded by sympathetic senators and civilian donors, who no longer believed the Council would do anything at all. And for every act of aid, they gained another follower, another Jedi who had seen too much, lost too much, waited too long. The Council issued warnings, then denouncements, then silence. They refused to expel the revanchists, afraid of what that might mean, afraid of what might come next, because the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Revan's forces weren't failing. They were winning. Small victories at first. A Mandalorian scouting party driven off over Suurja. A civilian convoy safely delivered to Telos. A captured command ship returned to Republic control. But they weren't just winning battles. They were winning trust. The Republic began calling them heroes. Not Jedi, not rebels, just hope. Soldiers welcomed them on sight. Civilians brought them food and water in burned-out settlements. Children followed their paths through the wreckage of war. And still, Revan never claimed power. He wore no special title, no command rank, only the mask. And behind him, the Jedi followed. Because in a galaxy that refused to move, he had become the tide. The first time Revan led troops into open battle, the Republic was losing. Not just the war, the will to fight it. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and spread too thin. Their admirals had no strategy. Their fleets had no morale. Their hope was already retreating. But Revan didn't retreat. He studied the Mandalorians. Every campaign, every tactic. He learned how they moved, how they provoked, how they tested. And then, he struck. It wasn't with brute strength. It was with clarity. He knew their patterns, anticipated their feints, laid traps along hyperspace corridors they thought were secure. He chose his battles, never to win territory, only time. Because the Republic didn't need a hero. It needed breathing room. And Revan gave it to them. At Jebel, he led a surgical strike that collapsed a Mandalorian fuel line, grounding an entire invasion fleet. At Vanquo, he coordinated Republic and revanchist forces to encircle a Crusader company in the canyons and erase them without civilian casualties. At Duro, a critical trade world already half lost, he saved 3 cities in one day by disabling the orbital siege platforms before they could fire. Each success wasn't just military. It was psychological. The Mandalorians, for the first time, were losing ground, and they were losing it to a Jedi. But Revan didn't celebrate. He adapted, because with every battle, he saw more. More horror, more cruelty, more lines that the Mandalorians would cross without hesitation. And slowly, he stopped drawing lines of his own. He authorized strikes that left nothing standing, approved preemptive assaults without Republic approval, used captured Mandalorian weapons even when they were outlawed. Not because he wanted to win at any cost, because he believed there was no other way. Malak didn't question it. He embraced it, and others followed. Not all gladly. Some questioned what they were becoming. What kind of Jedi bomb a supply route? What kind of Jedi order orbital fire without negotiation? But those voices grew quiet. Because the war was loud. Revan never explained himself. He never gave speeches. He just kept moving. He saw the war like no one else did. Not as numbers or maps, but as shape, rhythm, a pulse. And when that pulse shifted, he shifted with it. To the Republic, he became a general. To the front lines, he became a myth. He wore the same robes, carried the same lightsaber. But beneath the mask, something was changing. He spoke less, slept less, meditated only in silence, always alone. Because every victory added weight. Every life saved came with another lost. He began carrying names, lists of the fallen, Jedi, soldiers, civilians. He memorized them, refused to let them become numbers. Because the mask was never meant to hide his face. It was meant to hold his guilt. And now it was full. He never returned to the temple. Not once, even when summoned, even when threatened with exile. Revan remained where the war was. In the dust, in the blood, in the silence after a bombardment. To the Republic, he had become something greater than Jedi. A commander, a strategist, a savior. But to the Council, he had become something far more dangerous. A symbol, not of darkness, but of disobedience. They had tried to maintain order, balance, neutrality, but Revan had torn through that veil, and the galaxy had followed him. Not because he promised victory, because he acted, and in that action, he forced everyone else to make a choice. Some Jedi called him a heretic, others a hero, but in truth, he was both. Because Revan no longer walked among them, he walked ahead. The more he won, the more the Council feared. They feared his influence, his control, his ability to command Jedi by belief alone, without formal rank, without decree. And they feared what might come next. Because Revan had stopped asking for guidance, stopped justifying his decisions, stopped waiting for permission. He no longer questioned the code. He simply carried it differently, bent it, reforged it, made it serve the moment. To some, this was strength. To others, arrogance. To him, it was necessity. But there were signs, moments, when his eyes lingered too long on a fallen Mandalorian. When he spoke of ends, more than means. When even Malak, ever loyal, began to ask questions and was met with silence. Because something inside Revan had begun to fracture. He was winning. But the victories were hollow. Each campaign brought more ruin. Each world saved came at a greater cost. He stood alone, even when surrounded. Not because he chose to, but because no one else could carry what he now held. The mask, once a vow to remember the fallen, had become something else. A line between who he had been and who he was becoming. He didn't remove it. Not even in council with his closest allies. Not even in the rare moments of rest between systems. Because he wasn't hiding from others. He was hiding from what the war was making of him. The Jedi who defied peace had become the warrior who knew only conflict. And the Mandalorians still came. Revan had pushed them back, forced them to retreat, cut off their supply lines and shattered key strongholds. But the war wasn't over. It was changing. And deep in the Force, a darker storm was gathering. Not in the enemy, not in the Council, in him. And when the war ended, Revan would not return as the same Jedi who left. He would return as something else. Something the galaxy would learn to fear. There were places in the galaxy that even the Jedi did not speak of. Not because they were hidden, but because they were remembered. Malachor was one of them. A planet long buried in silence, covered in scars that the Force never healed. A wound that pulsed in shadows. No one lived there. No one studied there. It wasn't on the charts, not officially. But Revan knew it. He had found it years before the final battle. Before the Republic called him a hero. Before the Jedi called him dangerous. And even then, he understood what it was. It wasn't a world. It was a grave. Beneath the surface, ancient structures rose like broken teeth. Temples cracked in half by some forgotten war. Statues of Sith lords long erased from memory, still standing. watching, waiting. The air was wrong, too heavy, like the planet was remembering its own pain. The Force here didn't speak, it whispered, and what it said even the strongest among them couldn't explain. But Revan didn't fear Malachor. He studied it. He knew what the Mandalorians feared. Disorder, chaos, things they couldn't control. And he knew they would come. If he made them, the war had dragged on long enough. Too many fronts, too many losses. The Republic was breaking. The Jedi were fractured. And Revan was changing. He didn't believe in battles anymore. He believed in endings. And Malachor offered one. He proposed a final campaign, a decisive blow that would end the Mandalorian crusade forever. His commanders followed without question. His Jedi followed with caution. But none truly understood what Malachor was. Except one. Meetra Surik, the Jedi general, who would one day be known as the Exile, felt something different when her boots touched that soil. A tremor, a scream beneath her feet. She said nothing. She obeyed orders. She placed her forces where Revan told her to, because she believed in him. Even if the Force didn't. The Republic fleets were positioned in orbit. Jedi battle groups aligned in formation. The Mandalorians, unaware of what waited, moved into the system exactly as planned. Everything was in place. But the battle had never been real. Revan didn't want to win. He wanted to end it. And Malachor was the only place that could hold what he had built in secret. At the planet's core, buried beneath layers of ancient stone and forgotten war, waited the key, the mass shadow generator, a weapon powered not by fire, but by gravity, a machine that didn't destroy targets. It collapsed them, ripped them downward, turned the battlefield into a black tomb from which nothing could escape. It had one purpose: to break everything. And now, it was ready. Revan didn't call it a trap. He called it necessity. The Mandalorians had grown bolder even in defeat. Every system they lost, they set aflame. Every retreat, a sacrifice to their war gods. They weren't just losing. They were choosing how to die. And that made them dangerous. Revan knew Mandalore the Ultimate wouldn't run forever. Not from him. Because Revan had become more than a Jedi. More than a commander. To the Mandalorians, he was the challenge they could not ignore. And so he made the call. He sent the message. He spoke in the only language they understood. Final battle. No retreat. One system. One victor. Mandalore accepted. Not because he was confident, but because he had to. The clans were splintering. The war was failing. Their vision of glory was collapsing, and only one act remained: to face the one who had beaten them at every turn. They entered the Malachor system with full force. Dreadnoughts, basilisks, shock troopers. Their war machine forged across hundreds of worlds. Now focused on one. But they didn't know where they were going. Malachor wasn't just cursed. It was hungry. And Revan had chosen it for a reason. In orbit, the Republic fleet spread wide. A half-ring formation. Intentionally vulnerable, designed to draw them in. Meetra Surik commanded the center. The Jedi forces positioned like bait. Every maneuver, every signal, carefully calculated to appear desperate. They weren't desperate. They were waiting. Revan had warned no one. Not Surik, not Malak, not even his closest strategists. They knew the enemy would die, but they didn't know how, or how many of their own would be pulled with them. The mass shadow generator sat dormant beneath the surface, its systems locked, its activation tethered to a single signal. Revan held that signal, and still, he hesitated. He stood alone in the command deck of his flagship, watching the battle unfold in real time. The Mandalorians fell into formation, engaged the Republic line, pushed forward exactly as he knew they would. He waited, watched, let them believe they were winning. He needed them committed. He needed them over the planet, not above it, over it. Because once the signal was sent, there would be no escape. Mitra's comms began to crackle, requests for support, conflicting orders, screams. She held her ground, not knowing what waited beneath her. Even Malak, leading a flanking assault, didn't sense the true plan, because Revan kept it from them. Not out of malice, out of burden. He knew what they would say, what they would try to stop. But they didn't see what he saw. The war had to end. Now, here, no matter the cost. And as the last Mandalorian capital ship descended into Malachor's upper atmosphere, he sent the signal. The signal was short, a single transmission, a whisper sent into the dark. Then the galaxy broke. The first thing anyone felt wasn't light. It was gravity, a pull that turned the sky inside out. The fleets above Malachor began to twist. Engines failed. Communications died. And then the falling began. The mass shadow generator didn't fire a beam or explosion. It awakened the planet's own mass. It turned its gravity inward, a hunger that fed on everything above it. Dreadnoughts, transports, basilisks, starfighters, all dragged down at once. Their hulls buckled. Their crews screamed. Some ships tried to jump to hyperspace, but the gravity field tore them in half before the coordinates even locked. The Republic fleet shattered first. Thousands of soldiers who never knew what had happened. They were still obeying orders when the sky swallowed them whole. Then came the Mandalorians. Their fleet, once disciplined and precise, now spinning through fire and debris. They didn't retreat. They couldn't. Their war chants were drowned out by static and collapsing metal. Casus Fett's command ship cracked open in orbit. Its escape pods never launched. Mandalore's own dreadnought, the Spirit of Vengeance, fell into the gravity well and vanished in a streak of red light. The planet pulled everything down. Even the sound of war disappeared. And on the surface, the world itself began to break. The crust tore open. Continents folded. Mountains bent into themselves like glass under flame. Lightning carved across the sky without thunder. A planet screaming as it consumed both sides. Mitra Surik was there. She felt every death. All at once. Her fleet, her soldiers, her friends. Thousands of voices through the force. Then silence. Too fast to grieve. Too many to count. The shock of it nearly killed her. But instead, it did something worse. It severed her. She cut herself off from the force, instinctively, completely, just to survive the sound of it. The emptiness that followed became her scar, a silence she would never escape. Above, Revan watched from his flagship. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He just watched the battle collapse into nothing. He had won. The Mandalorians were gone. The war was over. But so was everything else. The fleets were gone. The soldiers, the Jedi, the soul of the Republic's faith, all buried under a single decision. A moment that could never be undone. And Malachor, once a dead world, now became something worse. A place of echoes. A wound in the Force so deep, it would never heal. The war ended in silence. No peace treaty. No surrender. Just a graveyard. Malachor 5 was no longer a planet. It was a scar. A world-shaped wound where Jedi and Mandalorian alike had vanished. The Republic declared victory. But no one celebrated. Not the soldiers who survived. Not the families who waited. Not the Jedi, who had watched their own become executioners. Mandalore, the ultimate, was already dead. Revan had found him before Malachor, defeated him in single combat, stripped him of his armor, and buried his name beneath one final question. Before he died, Mandalore told Revan the truth, that the Mandalorians had been pushed into war by visions, by something darker, something waiting in the unknown regions. He gave Revan coordinates, a direction, not an answer. And Revan, still wearing the mask, still stained by Malachor's fire, made a choice. He didn't return to Coruscant. He didn't answer the Council's summons. He vanished. Malak followed, others too, those who had come this far, who had stood in the shadow of the mass shadow generator, and could not go back. The galaxy thought it had been saved, but the Force knew otherwise. Malachor had not brought peace. It had revealed the cost of survival. Mitra Surik stood in the ruins, alone. Her connection to the Force shattered. Her army gone. Her spirit quiet. She returned to face the Council. They exiled her, not out of cruelty, but because they feared what she had become, and what they had allowed her to become. The Jedi tried to forget Malachor. The Senate buried the reports. The archives redacted the numbers. But memory has a shape, and the Force never forgets. Some said Revan had done what had to be done. That without Malachor, the Mandalorians would have never stopped. Others said he had gone too far. That in trying to save the galaxy, he had broken the only thing that could keep it whole. But Revan never answered those voices, because he was already gone. Into the void, following a whisper, chasing the shadow that had started all of this. And when he returned, he would not come back as a Jedi or as a hero. He would come back as something else. They called him a savior, the man who ended the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi who stopped the tide. But Revan didn't return to Coruscant. He didn't kneel before the High Council. He didn't speak to the Senate. He didn't celebrate. He vanished. There was no ceremony, no farewell address, no promise of peace, just silence and shadow. The war was over, but the wound remained, and Revan carried all of it. The Republic rebuilt what it could. Ships, cities, stories. They called it victory because they had to. But the ones who fought knew better. They had seen what Revan had done, not just at Malachor, but before. The choices, the calculations, the way he stopped seeing battles and started seeing equations. To him, war had become a shape, a problem with a solution, and Malachor was the answer no one else would choose. The Jedi Order didn't speak his name. Not in open halls, not in private chambers. He had broken their code, and they couldn't admit he had saved them. But some still waited. Mitra Surik, Jedi who had followed him to the end, Jedi who had lived. They believed he would return, that the man behind the mask would walk back into the light. He didn't, because something had shifted in him, something that couldn't be unbroken. He didn't speak of guilt, or pain, or doubt, because Revan didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a weapon left activated too long. The mask remained, so did the silence. He withdrew from the galaxy, traveled far beyond Republic space. Not with armies, just with questions. He spoke to no one of his destination, not even Malak. All they knew was that he was searching. For what? They weren't sure. But those who were closest knew the truth. Revan hadn't ended the war. He had only reached its edge. Because Mandalore the Ultimate had said something before he died. Something Revan never shared. Not in words, but it changed everything. A name, a place, a warning, a shadow that moved before the Mandalorians. Something that whispered from beyond known space. Something ancient. Something hungry. Revan had seen too much to ignore it. He had felt it on Malachor. Felt it beneath the broken stone, beneath the ruins, beneath the blood. The war wasn't over. Not truly. It had only shifted. And Revan, the Jedi who defied peace, could feel it coming. The next war, the real one. So he went looking, alone. And the hero was never seen the same way again. There are places in the galaxy that light does not reach. Worlds that exist between gravity and silence, where maps end and memory fades. That's where he went. The unknown regions. A maze of dead stars and warped hyperspace corridors. The edge of everything. Revan's ship drifted for months. His crew followed without question. Malak among them loyal, but uneasy. He had fought beside Revan long enough to sense the change. The stillness, the distance, the feeling that his commander was listening to something no one else could hear. They searched for Mandalorian remnants, for clues about the war's beginning. But what they found was older. Ruins on forgotten worlds. Symbols no one could translate. Technology fused with the dark side itself. Traces of a civilization that had shaped the galaxy before the Republic had even begun. The Sith Empire. Not the kind the galaxy knew. Not a cult or rebellion. An empire hidden in the void. Silent for centuries. Waiting. And in that silence, something was watching. They felt it before they saw it. Whispers. Visions. Dreams that weren't dreams. At first, they thought it was the echo of Malachor. Residual trauma from a war they hadn't left behind. But Revan knew better. The presence was too deliberate, too focused. It wasn't memory. It was invitation. He didn't resist. He followed it. He wanted to understand. The trail led to Dromund Kaz, a storm-racked world of perpetual darkness. A place that didn't appear on any map, because it wasn't meant to. There, they found the Sith Emperor. No battle, no warning, just a voice that filled the mind like cold fire. It spoke to Revan first, not in language, in understanding. It didn't threaten. It promised. It offered purpose. The Emperor showed him visions of a galaxy unified under order. A peace forged through control, not compassion. A stability that the Republic and Jedi could never achieve. A truth hidden beneath the ruins of every war. Malak couldn't hear what Revan heard. He only saw what it was doing to him. The calm replaced by obsession. The clarity replaced by devotion. A loyalty that wasn't to the Jedi, or to the Republic, or even to himself. Something had entered him on that world, something that would never leave. Revan stood before the Emperor for 3 days. When he emerged, he was changed. The mask remained, but behind it, the voice was no longer his alone. He spoke of destiny now, of preparation, of the need to unite the galaxy before the true Sith returned. But there was no more doubt in his words, only certainty, and that certainty felt wrong. Malak followed, because he always had, but he began to wonder, who was leading him now? Revan believed he was in control, that he had seen the truth, that he could use the darkness without becoming it. But the whisper that spoke to him in the void knew better. The Jedi had won the war, but the Force had already chosen its next one, and it would begin with him. Alec was never a silent man. Where Revan thought in cold patterns, Alec acted from the heat of a moment. He felt things first. He moved on instinct. That was his strength, and it would be his burden. When Revan changed, Alec noticed before anyone else. Not in words, in small things. The way Revan paused over a map and saw not lines but endings. The way he listened to reports as if they were music, searching for a note only he could hear. At first, Alec trusted him. He had followed Revan through burned worlds and broken codes. He had bled beside him. He had watched Revan carve purpose from silence. But when Revan left for the unknown regions, a different seed settled in Alec's chest. Loneliness, responsibility, a creeping question about what leadership looked like without the man who had shaped it. He held the line. He led the armies Revan left behind. He took the victories and the losses and folded them into meaning. He kept the mask's memory alive, even when he did not wear it. But there were nights when he stood under the stars and felt the weight of another truth. The war had given him power. People listened when he spoke. Generals followed his plan without question. Soldiers called his name with trust. Such power changes a man. It first became a whisper. Small decisions made for expedience. A blockade tightened, a prisoner executed quietly. The war demanded choices that blurred the lines the Jedi had once drawn. Alec told himself he did what was needed. He comforted himself with duty. But duty can harden into hunger. He watched Revan's absence like a tide. Each day the mask did not return, Alec's voice grew louder on the field. Where Revan had strategized from silence, Alec stood among the men and made the calls that mattered. And people began to look to him, not only as a commander, but as a symbol. Some said he was the true blade of the revanchists. Others whispered that he would take what Revan left behind. Those whispers did not bother him. They were wind. What did trouble him was seeing the change in Revan's commands when they returned for short moments between voyages. Orders that pushed harder. Acceptable losses tolerated without comment. a calm that felt like distance. Alec asked questions, simple ones, and the answers came back wrapped in certainty. "We must finish it," Revan would say. "We must cut the root so it cannot grow." There was no room for debate. Alec began to feel the shape of choice. He saw the Council's fear. He saw the Republic's gratitude. He felt the weight of lives that trusted his judgment. And ambition, quiet, patient, grew in him. Not greed for titles, not thirst for glory, but a hunger to secure what they had won, to ensure that no other war would rend the galaxy apart. That hunger took form in small acts of control. A territory held a day longer, an enemy officer taken in the dark, a plan executed with a brutality that left no doubts. When others protested, Alec quelled them. He argued the logic. The ends justified the decisions. He used Revan's name like a blade to silence doubt. Yet, even as he tightened his grip, a part of him remembered who he'd been. The loyalty to a friend, the refusal to let pain become the driver of justice. It made him uncomfortable. But the war did not wait for comfort. It demanded results. And Alec delivered. So when Revan finally returned from the void, not the same, but with a new purpose, Alec did not step back. He stepped forward. Because he had a choice. To remain the shield that protected Revan's command, or to become something more. He chose to stay near the fire. To hold the forge, to watch the man he loved slip into a shadow, and to make sure the shadow had an edge sharp enough to protect what remained. It is easy to say loyalty. It is harder to admit why we stay. For Alec, it was both. Love of a friend, and the realization that the war had shaped him into a leader the galaxy needed, however dark that need would become. And in the quiet hours, when the stars were thin and the reports kept coming, he would stand and wait. Wait for Revan to return fully. Wait for the moment the line finally broke between what they had saved and what they would have to destroy to keep it. He watched, he waited, and he prepared. Because power sleeps uneasily in the hands of those who have already lost much. It wasn't a fall, it was a departure, not into darkness, but into something older, something waiting. By the time Revan and Malak returned to known space, they were no longer Jedi, not in name, not in thought, and certainly not in purpose. They had left something behind in the unknown regions. Or perhaps they had brought something back. The Council felt it. A silence that carried weight. A certainty that smelled of war. Revan spoke of uniting the galaxy. Of building an empire strong enough to survive what was coming. Not if. When. He never spoke the name of the Sith Emperor. Never spoke of Dromund Kaz. But the shadow was there. In every decision, every plan, he began recruiting, quietly, carefully. The war had left many systems disillusioned with the Republic. Warlords ruled the Outer Rim. Smugglers controlled supply lines. Peace, as the Jedi called it, was a fragile lie. Revan offered order. He promised justice where the Senate had offered delay. He gave purpose to lost warriors. And they followed. Some followed out of loyalty. Some followed out of fear. But most followed because Revan gave them something the Republic had not. Direction. Malak stood at his side, faithful and burning. But the cracks were widening. He saw how Revan kept secrets. How the mask no longer came off, even in private. Revan had once spoken of healing the galaxy. Now, he spoke of controlling it. The difference was small, almost invisible, but it was there. Then, one day, he left. No explanation, no warning. Gone. The fleet remained, but the heart of it was missing, and Malak was no longer sure if he had been left behind or set in place. The Jedi Council tried to reach him. So did old friends. But Revan was already beyond their grasp, into the unknown regions again, back to the place where the stars did not speak. Some say he was looking for the source. Others say he was running from what he had become. No one knows, and perhaps that is the point. Because Revan did not vanish with a scream. He vanished with a whisper. And in that silence, the galaxy prepared to shatter again. His disappearance left a vacuum. Malak stepped forward. The Republic moved on. The Jedi tried to clean the wounds. But something had changed. The peace that followed felt wrong, like calm before a coming fire. Because those who vanish into darkness do not always return as themselves. Sometimes they return as reminders, other times as warnings, and sometimes they return as conquerors. Revan had seen something no one else had. A threat greater than the Mandalorians, older than the Jedi, deeper than the Force most understood. He believed only strength could stop it. So he had tried to become that strength. But in doing so, he forgot the cost. Now, he was gone. And all that remained was a name, Revan, spoken in fear, spoken in reverence, spoken in silence. Into the unknown, he had gone. And in the unknown, his legend waited. The war didn't end in a battlefield. It ended in silence. There were no legions, no firebombs from orbit, no speeches about peace. Just two men, and the weight of 1,000 fallen systems between them. Mandalore, the ultimate, stood on the scorched surface of an unnamed moon near Malachor. His armor was blackened from a dozen campaigns. His axe still dripped from his last kill. But there was something strange in his posture that day. Not fear, not arrogance, but stillness. As if the war had already ended inside him. And across from him stood Revan, cloaked in silence, the mask of the fallen Cathar still covering his face. No anger, no hatred, just purpose. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because both of them knew what this was. Not a duel for glory, not a test of strength, but an ending, one that had waited far too long. The Mandalorian Wars had left entire sectors burning. Sirocco, Cathar, Ulthar. Worlds turned to glass under Mandalorian bombardment. Revan had matched that fire with surgical precision, striking where it hurt most, never hesitating, never slowing. But this moment, this duel, was personal. Mandalore struck first. A brutal downward blow meant to cleave through any defense. But Revan was already moving. They clashed like forces of nature. Metal screamed against lightsaber. Dust rose, and time slowed. Every movement was a memory. A reminder of battles fought, soldiers buried, and choices made too late. Revan did not fight to prove superiority. He fought because the galaxy could not carry this war any longer. Because the only way to stop the Mandalorians was to cut off the head of their faith. And Mandalore, He fought knowing the war had already been lost. But he fought anyway, because warriors don't kneel. They fall standing. The duel did not last long. Great duels rarely do. It ended with a single stroke. Revan's blade burned through Mandalore's defenses. The axe fell from his grip, and the warrior dropped to one knee. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't afraid. He simply looked up and did what few Mandalorians had done in 1,000 years. He surrendered, but not with words. He reached up, removed his helmet, and offered Revan something far more dangerous than victory. A secret. The coordinates of the true enemy. The ones who had whispered in his mind. The ones who had guided the Mandalorians to start a war that wasn't theirs. The Sith. The ones still hidden in the unknown regions. And then, before another word was spoken, Revan struck him down. No hesitation. No mercy. Just silence. Because Revan could not allow the symbol to survive. Mandalore was more than a man. He was an idea, and ideas are harder to kill than armies. But Revan knew how. He took the mask, and with it, he took the future. When the final strike landed, Mandalore didn't fall right away. He knelt, breathing heavy through broken armor, the sound of his respirator faltering in the dust. Revan stood over him, lightsaber drawn but still. Even through the mask, his expression was unreadable. There was no satisfaction in victory, only inevitability. Mandalore's hand moved slowly toward his helmet, the sacred symbol no warrior was ever meant to remove before another. It was the face of their people, the weight of their creed. To take it off was to die. But he did. Not out of defeat, out of truth. The metal came loose with a hiss. He looked up at Revan, eyes clear, even as blood ran down his jaw. And for the first time, there was no war between them. Only understanding. He spoke quietly, his voice steady despite the weakness in it. We were deceived. Revan didn't answer. He only listened. The Mandalorians did not choose this war. We were guided to it, told it was our destiny. But the voice that called us was not ours. He coughed, a sound that echoed through the empty plain. It came from the darkness beyond the rim, a power older than any we've known. They promised strength. They promised purpose. And I believed them. Revan's hand tightened around his saber. Because he knew that voice. He had heard it too. On Dromund Kaas. In dreams. In whispers that still lingered after Malachor. The Sith, Revan said. Mandalore nodded once. He reached into a compartment in his chest plate and pulled out a small, data-etched disk. Coordinates. Old, untraceable. Written in a code that no Republic system could read. He pressed it into Revan's hand. The true enemy lies there, he said. Not the Republic. Not the Jedi. The ones who command the shadows. Revan took it. Not as a trophy, but as a curse. He looked down at the man before him, the symbol of everything he had fought against. And yet, in this moment, Mandalore was more honest than any Jedi had ever been. You were strong, Revan said softly. Stronger than your cause deserved. Mandalore smiled. It wasn't pride. It was relief. Then ended. Revan ignited his blade. The light filled the dust. And Mandalore the ultimate. The last great warlord of his kind was gone. When it was done, Revan stood alone. The wind swept across the battlefield, carrying ash and silence. He looked down at the helmet in his hand, the one every Mandalorian would one day swear to reclaim. He didn't understand it yet, but he had just become a part of their story too. A thief of legacies, a keeper of ghosts, the Jedi who killed Mandalore and unknowingly inherited his war. The war didn't stop when Mandalore died. It dissolved, like smoke caught in the wind. Across the outer rim, Mandalorian warships halted mid-siege. Clans that had marched together for years suddenly stopped receiving orders. Channels went dark, command chains collapsed. Their leader was gone, and with him, their unity. Revan didn't just kill a man that day. He shattered a myth. The Mandalorians had always believed in strength, that it was their destiny to conquer, to test themselves against the galaxy, and break anything that stood in their way. But what do you do when the galaxy breaks you first? Revan gave them no time to answer. He returned to the war's final strongholds, not with fleets, but with a message. Lay down your arms, bury your armor, or be destroyed. It wasn't mercy, it was control. He knew their code, their pride. He had studied it, worn it, turned it against them. And so, the clans, without a Mandalore to unite them, had no choice but to obey. The mask had been taken, the symbol of their people, and Revan refused to pass it on. Without the mask, no new Mandalore could rise. No successor could lead. No warrior could rally them. It was more than humiliation. It was erasure. Entire foundries were dismantled. Armor was melted down. Warriors were ordered to destroy their own weapons, to gut their own starships. It wasn't just disarmament. It was desecration. Fathers broke the blades they had forged for their sons. Veterans buried jetpacks and gauntlets beneath the bones of fallen kin. Ceremonial paint was scrubbed from Beskar chest plates, as if color itself had become treason. A culture built on battle had been stripped of its reason to exist. Some resisted. A few clans refused to yield. But without Mandalore, without the mask, their resistance was just noise. Revan crushed them, quietly, efficiently, not with cruelty, but with finality, because to him, the war had to end completely, not just in body, but in spirit. He wasn't cleansing the galaxy of Mandalorians. He was burning out the part of them that believed war was a birthright. But in doing so, he ignited something else, a deeper anger, one without form, one that would sleep but never die. Because identity cannot be erased, only buried, and Revan had buried them alive. The clans dispersed. Some became mercenaries. Others hid their armor in sealed vaults, vowing never to forget. They called it the Great Shame. But in whispers, around fire pits on ruined moons, elders told the story of what Revan had taken. Not just the mask, but the future. And one day, someone would take it back. The war was over, but something still burned. Not in the skies, not in the cities, but in the bones. The Republic thought it had won, that the Mandalorians had been erased, disarmed, scattered, broken, and on the surface, it was true. The clans were leaderless, their traditions outlawed, their sacred rites forbidden. Even their children were taught to forget. But memory does not die. Not in people who carry war like blood. They went underground, not to hide, but to heal, to wait. Some joined mercenary bands in the Outer Rim. Some vanished into the deep systems, settling on forgotten worlds, where even Republic maps dared not go. But they all remembered. They remembered the cries of Seroko, the silence of Cathar, the final duel on the scorched soil near Malachor, and the man who stole their future, Revan. The name became legend, not just to the Jedi, but to the Mandalorians. To the Republic, he was a savior. To the Jedi, a warning. But to the clans, he was a wound that would never close. And like all wounds, it festered. In time, a warrior rose. Not with armies, but with stories. Canderous Ordo, a survivor of the war. One who had followed Mandalore the Ultimate into countless battles, and watched everything burn. But Ordo didn't bury his armor. He polished it, maintained it, spoke to it, because to him, it was not a relic, it was a promise. He traveled the galaxy, gathering what remained. Lost clans, forgotten warriors, those who still believed. And then, he found the mask. How he recovered it remains unclear. Some say he found it in a vault, on Dxun. Others believe Revan gave it to him. Not as a gift, but as a challenge. Whatever the truth, Ordo took it, and with it, he became Mandalore. The title reborn, not in triumph, but in defiance. He did not raise legions. He did not call for war. He rebuilt, quietly, deliberately, because he understood what Revan had tried to do, and he knew it had failed. You can kill a body, you can shatter a culture, but you cannot burn out what was never born of peace. Mandalore was not a crown, not a mask, not even a person. It was an idea. And ideas, they wait. They drift between stars, resting in the hearts of those who still believe in fire. And long after Revan disappeared into the unknown regions, long after Jedi historians declared the Mandalorians extinct, the clans stirred again. Not out of hate, not even revenge, but because the galaxy would always need warriors who did not fear death. And because some fires, no matter how deep they are buried, never die. The war was over, but no one knew what to do with the silence. There were no parades, no real victories, just broken systems, burnt cities, and a galaxy that had forgotten how to breathe. The Republic, desperate to move forward, called it a success. They had survived. That was enough for the Senate. But the people, those who had lost everything, knew better. The Mandalorians may have fallen, but the damage they left behind didn't die with them. It spread like smoke through every corridor of power, through every refugee camp, every ruined starport, every mind. Cathar was gone, Seroko shattered, Ulthar never rebuilt. Whole worlds were erased, not just from maps, but from memory. The Outer Rim whispered their names like ghosts, while Coruscant pretended they never existed. And the Jedi, they went quiet. They had won the war, some said, but it didn't feel like a Jedi victory. Revan had done what the Council would not. He ended the invasion, but at a cost no one could explain. There were still reports coming in from the Rim, reports of mass graves, of cities reduced to glass, of survivors who walked but never spoke again. The Republic sent aid. Sometimes, mostly they sent silence. And in that silence, something began to rot. The front lines had moved, not into space, but into people. Soldiers returned home, only to find their names forgotten. Whole units were disbanded. Commanders who had led battles were replaced by senators who never left their chambers. The medals meant nothing. The scars stayed. Some Jedi tried to return to their old lives, tried to find the Force again in meditation and peace. But the Force didn't speak. Not to them. Not after Malachor. Something had been broken, something sacred. Others left. They couldn't return to the temple. Not after what they'd seen. Some disappeared entirely. Others tried to help, healing where they could. But even their efforts felt hollow. The galaxy wanted to move on. And those who remembered the war became inconvenient reminders of a time no one wished to face. In the Outer Rim, children still searched for parents that would never return. Settlements tried to rebuild from ash, only to be abandoned again when supplies ran out. Pirates moved in, feeding on what was left. In some sectors, the Republic flag had never returned at all. And the Mandalorians, what remained of them, scattered, their warriors disarmed, their clans disbanded. But the stories stayed. Stories of a leader who never yielded, of warriors who fought for honor. The war had broken them, yes, but something about their fire lingered in the ruins. Peace had returned to the galaxy, but not to the people. She stood before the Jedi Council, but the Force did not stand with her. Mitra Surik, a decorated general in Revan's crusade, a leader at Malachor V, returned home not as a hero, but as a wound the Jedi did not know how to heal. She had obeyed Revan's commands. She had followed the war to its last breath. But when the final weapon was activated, and Malachor screamed in the dark, she felt something break deep inside her. It wasn't death. It wasn't exile. It was emptiness. The council didn't understand it, or maybe they did and chose to turn away. They called her back only to cast her out, not with anger, not with violence, but with cold detachment. She had severed her connection to the Force, they said, and for that she was no longer Jedi. They did not ask her why. They did not ask what it felt like to lose the only thing that had ever guided her. So she left, not with fury, but with silence. She walked alone, through outer rim stations and nameless freighters, drifting between systems like a shadow with no anchor. People would speak to her, but she rarely spoke back. She wasn't searching for redemption. She wasn't even searching for answers. She was just trying to exist in a galaxy that no longer made sense. Sometimes she helped. A lost child reunited with a parent, a village defended against raiders, small things, quiet things. But even then, the Force did not return. It watched her from a distance, like a memory that refused to fade. And in every act of kindness, there was a tremor of guilt. Because Mitra remembered Malachor, not as a battlefield but as a graveyard. She had felt thousands die in a single moment. Friends, enemies, allies she had trained with, fought beside. Gone, in one flash of unnatural destruction. She had stood near the core of that weapon. She had survived it. But survival didn't feel like mercy. It felt like punishment. Her nights were filled with echoes, screams that never faded, a planet's crust torn open like paper, soldiers dragged into the abyss by shadows. And Revan, the man she had followed without question, had vanished. She didn't know if she hated him or missed him. All she knew was that she had given everything and returned with nothing. The galaxy remembered Revan's war. The Republic remembered the cost. But the exile, she became a myth, a name without a face, a traitor to the Jedi, a survivor without a cause. Mitra Surik did not fall to the dark side. She fell into absence, a living scar the Jedi refused to acknowledge, a general who saved the Republic and was forgotten by it. Not every scar from the Mandalorian Wars came from the battlefield. Some were carved by those who were meant to protect. Zane Carrick was one of them. A Padawan untested, awkward, too kind for war. He was stationed on Taris when everything began to unravel. While Revan and Malak waged their crusade across the Outer Rim, the Jedi stationed on Taris faced a different kind of war, one against prophecy. His masters had seen something in the Force, a vision, a glimpse of betrayal. They believed their Padawans, their own students, would one day fall to darkness and destroy the Order from within. And so, before that future could come to pass, they tried to stop it by killing them. Zane arrived late to his own graduation. He expected honor. Instead, he found bodies. His friends, the other Padawans, dead on the temple floor. Their masters standing over them in silence. They called it mercy. They called it prevention. They said they had no choice. But the Force never justifies fear. Zane ran. He ran from the Order, from the Council, from everyone who should have protected him. And as the galaxy tried to heal from one war, he became the hunted in another. The Republic labeled him a fugitive. His masters spread lies, claiming he had turned against them. But he didn't fight back. He didn't seek vengeance. He just wanted to survive. He fled through the Outer Rim, a Jedi without allies, haunted by guilt for deaths he hadn't caused. He hid among smugglers, pirates, and ex-soldiers still recovering from the war. He saw what the Republic refused to see. That victory had meant nothing. That peace was a story for those far from the scars. And slowly, his running became something else. A mission. A quiet rebellion. He exposed corruption where he found it, saved lives when he could, and refused to take another life unless he had no choice. Because Zane Carrick had seen what fear did to Jedi. He had seen how visions of the future could destroy the present. He never became a legend. No one sang his name, but his survival meant something. He proved that mercy could exist, even when the Order forgot it. The Mandalorian Wars had forged killers, broken generals, and exiled heroes. But in Zane, there remained one simple truth the galaxy had forgotten. You could still be good, even after the war, even when no one believed in you. The war had ended, but its echoes never did. The Republic tried to rebuild. Cities were patched, treaties signed, and fleets restructured. But something deeper had been broken, something beneath the surface of every world that had once burned. On Sirocco, the ground still glowed at night. The air never fully healed. Parents buried vaporized remains in empty graves. On Cathar, silence became the language of grief. Survivors refused to rebuild the cities, choosing instead to let the ocean take what fire had not. The sea didn't judge. It only remembered. Everywhere the Mandalorians had touched, something stayed behind. Not rubble, not ruin, but memory. And memory, in the galaxy, was a living force. There were veterans who never put down their rifles, They stayed in armor long after the fighting was done. Not out of defiance, but because the armor was the only place they still made sense. It had shape, purpose, order. The rest of the galaxy felt like noise. Some Jedi returned to the Order, others didn't. For every knight who found peace, another fell into silence, or worse, into darkness. They had crossed lines the code had never prepared them for. They had ordered orbital strikes, sent fleets into refugee worlds, killed without honor. The Jedi didn't talk about those decisions. They held trials for Revan and Malak, even in their absence. But the deeper wounds, the ones the Council had caused through inaction and pride, were left to rot. And in the unknown regions, something stirred. Revan had gone beyond the edge of the maps. Malak followed him. The revanchists had vanished like whispers swallowed by deep space. But rumors remained. Murmurs of an old darkness calling to them. Of a true enemy waiting in shadows older than the Republic itself. Some believed it was fear that led Revan to strike first. Others believed it was duty. But either way, he never came back the same. And the war he started to save the galaxy would become the war that shattered it. This was the legacy of the Mandalorian Wars. Not just victory, not just defeat, but transformation. A galaxy that no longer trusted its guardians. A Jedi Order fractured at its core. A people like the Mandalorians humbled, scattered, but never broken. The wounds were everywhere, and not all of them bled. Some just lingered, in whispers, in dreams, in the spaces between stars where Revan disappeared. And those who survived, like Mitra, like Zane, like the nameless soldiers who drifted between systems, they carried that silence with them. Because sometimes the Force doesn't speak through prophecy. It speaks through absence.